email? What does it mean?
Communication is the imparting or exchanging of information or news.
The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place.
Conversation is the oral exchange of sentiments, observations, opinions, or ideas.
Forbes Books Radio presents The Conversation with Clinton M. Padgett.
Welcome back to part two of my discussion with Eric Stone, former Regional Vice President at Enterprise Mobility, founder and CEO of ClearPath Ventures, and author of Jumpstart Your Workplace Culture. We pick up the conversation with me asking Eric about having to make tough decisions as a leader. Another one you said that I thought was interesting was that adding is easy, but subtraction is smart. And it's not exactly the same thing, but the thought that popped into my head was sometimes subtraction can be addition. You know, by subtracting a bad egg, the team can get better. But what do you mean by adding is easy, but subtraction is hard? And then you had this concept of horse latitudes that kind of tied into that as well.
Yeah. Well, it's complexity bias. So there's a fallacy that says the more complicated it is, the more that people think it's actually going to work. And there's this big Lego study that was out there that they gave these engineers, you're being someone like yourself, Clint, who they gave a set of Legos to, and they said, make it better. And of course, they add to it. And they gave these literature scholars a poem, and they said, make it better. And they added sonnets to it, you know. And so it is just this fallacy of the more we do, the better. I always felt quite the opposite. I'll give you an example, was the matrix. We used to have a matrix that would rank people, and it was just too complicated. There were way too many things that were included. We wanted all these bells and whistles, but it got to the point where no one really even knew what was on it. And again, it's a basic example, but we truncated it to, God, I think it went down to 4 to 5, and we lived with those big things. And now people at least would understand a little bit easier of how they can get ranked and what they need to focus on. There were times where our documentation was just, when I first came to this region, it was like the Oprah book club, you know, you get a book and a car and everyone's getting a car. Everyone's getting documented, and it got to the point where it meant nothing. And so we said, you're only going to get documented on a few things, and it's going to be behaviors driven, really attitude, effort, coachability stuff. Ethics, behaviors, that's where we're going to lie, and the behaviors that lead, of course, to some important outcomes. But, so we always wanted to avoid some of the noise that can be out there. So that's the distraction catcher.
You mentioned earlier about turning a battleship. I spent 6 years on an aircraft carrier, and you definitely don't turn those quickly. But even with my 6 years in the Navy, I wasn't aware of horse latitudes and some of the stuff you talked about. So what is a horse latitude?
So yeah, this was back, I think it was when back in the steam-powered engines, and the ships would be going through, and they'd be carrying all these animals with it, and you really depend on the wind, and so sometimes you're in these doldrums of a lot of wind, no wind, and instead of the long version of it, instead of keeping all the animals, unfortunately, because they were eating all the food and weighing it down, they dumped them, unfortunately, overboard into the sea, to make things a little bit easier, less to manage, the horse doldrums. So the horse latitude score is an oldie.
And more for us to consume water-wise
right.
and food-wise, et cetera. So again, we're not condoning this. This is something that just happened in history.
That's right. So
another one of the acronyms was amplify, buffer, and convey. And so what role does that acronym play for you?
Crucial. You have to live in the amplify, and so the example would be if I'm at a bank, and there are 3 to 5 key initiatives that I'm trying to get through all my team. That's really important and needs to get amplified. So that goes from a morning huddle, the head teller has it with their tellers about compliance and customer acquisition and new clients landed, or whatever it may be, existing business that we've improved upon, customer retention, satisfaction. And so the head teller has it with the tellers once a day. And then weekly, the branch manager or assistant manager has it with the head teller. Same conversation, just maybe a little bit longer. Instead of 5 minutes, it's 30 minutes. And then monthly, the manager might meet with the assistant manager of that bank, and they're going to talk about those 3 to 5 things. And then quarterly, there might be this performance development meeting that one of the senior leaders will have with the branch manager of the bank. And then twice a year, the CEO might meet with somebody, and they're going to talk, maybe a senior director, HR, controller, whoever it is, and they're going to talk about some things until eventually it gets to the board once a year, same 3 to 5 key criteria in a forecasting type of setting. And so you're amplifying all of the things. It's well known throughout. It's something we're going to leverage, put our chips in to many layers of management so everyone gets it. The tougher one is, again, that buffer side of things, where you're going to take that long email, that complex document, and you're going to synthesize it using that first principle theory thinking, questioning all assumptions from A to Z, and taking that 15 to maybe it's a couple paragraphs. And, that's that buffer piece. You got to understand when it's time to avoid the noise. And then convey is just passing along. You're just giving that holiday parties coming soon, something that within the organization, certain dates or things, tasks that may need to be managed, you're going to kind of pass that on. When you buffer and convey really well, the amplification is compounded, and so you really can drive results and gain traction.
Okay. So we talked about meetings earlier, and I'm keen on this one because I spent a lot of time in meetings, and I do find that meetings can be impactful and they kind of get a bad rep sometimes. So what are some ways we can keep our meetings productive and useful?
So the biggest thing we did is we created a meeting matrix before we even got started of a list of all the meetings that would exist virtually, in person, wherever it would be. The length of the meeting, why were we having the meeting, what was the outcome we were hoping for. And similar to the story of the horses, we would throw some of them overboard when they didn't really follow suit. So we would start with a meeting matrix of what's necessary. So step one, we wanted to buffer the number. The other critical thing was you would have to have the agenda sent out within a week, well in advance, so people could at least start to prepare with a document or things like important data that they could research before the meeting, not necessarily even at the meeting. And so we wanted a specific agenda with some rough draft timelines that we're going to give 45 minutes. So let's put everything we have. We have 45 minutes for it, specific timelines. And then the key is in the meeting really is you're the orchestrator, you're the conductor of it. And you have to read the room a little bit and understand when someone's talking too much, too little. You have to be the one who has that delicate ability to really control the room, to get the most out of the room, sometimes call out the room and stay on task. We would have someone who was always looking at the time, because I was a stickler with that. Right or wrong, we were going to start on time, we were going to end on time, and we weren't going to waste time. And then we had something called the parking lot. So we all know it. There's going to be someone who goes on a great tangent, sometimes needed, sometimes not. And that would be we just throw that on the parking lot, meaning we're going to reserve the right to talk about that later. It might be important enough, but not today, because it wasn't on the agenda and it can't supersede something right now. And then the final thing was really the recaps, is an ability to take all this information with some simple, a paragraph or two. Here's what we committed to. And the big thing that really helped is we would take that meeting. Let's say it was a staff meeting, Clint, where you have these department heads. We would then, a week later, have a conference call with all the managers. Even though they already probably had some of the information, we would ask them what the meeting was about. And then we would fill in the blanks. We wouldn't stop there. We would then bring all the assistant managers, well, not up, but on a conference call. And we'd go over the same thing. What have you communicated throughout your settings, throughout your morning huddles that we would have? And so there's a lot that has to go behind it, and those are just a few.
Okay. Now, what role do team members play in carrying on the culture? I can't all just be top-down led. So, as a company employee, as a team member, what role do I play?
Yeah, this was hard for me because you always think that you have this ability to touch everybody, and you just don't as you continue to manage more. And I write a lot about the culture carriers of these select group of managers nominated by their peers to meet with me every other month. They were a huge contributing factor of really getting the message out. They weren't hearing that there's a think tank update from me. It was from them. They would go gather the streets and try to pull information, just like the hourglass that we talked about. So that was one huge piece, but we didn't just layer it there, Clint. It wasn't just the think tank, because we did have an assigned mentor program, which was yet another way for people to show that they could be a great mentor to someone who might be outside of their division. And so you'd have a think tank, you'd have a mentor program, and you'd have field presence that allows everybody to kind of observe these behaviors. And so it was critical that others, matter of fact, we had a mentor of the month. And so we talked about one of the key factors was recognizing top performance or rewarding it. And they would come to my house and we would invite all these winners, and we had a mentor of the month, the person who took the program super serious, because we wanted to put him on a pedestal and say, this is what leadership is all about. This is what employee development means. And so there were, again, as you could see, so many ways to amplify what we were trying to do.
So if I were going to establish a mentor program at my company, what characteristics would I look for? What makes one a good mentor?
I think number one, they have to understand two things. The role of the mentee, a defined outline of what the mentee's roles and responsibilities are, and then a defined outline of really what is a mentor. So we actually had to teach people how to be a great mentor. That was something we trained about, that it was a guidance piece. It is not to solve problems. It is to be there for. It is to pull. And so we actually had a setting that would allow us, once we decided what it's going to look like, this assigned kind of program, you also have to know how to be a really good mentor, or it's useless. And we had checks and balances of the program. So what would happen is they would kind of submit a great story of all the things that they learned or were guided through. And if in fact they met, it was, did you meet? What was some guidance you might have received? They would bubble that up to their area managers. And now, it wouldn't be anything personal. This was kind of like a business thing that would be done. So it was kind of a business mentor program. And that was very, very helpful for people. And we would then send surveys out like everybody does. But one of our most important questions is, step one, are you aware we have a mentor program? And is it valuable? Because, people can be wise guys every once in a while. And no, we have one. So, we always wanted to kind of trust and verify that it was truly living up to what we feel, and they would grade it. So these are all the things that you have to go behind it before you establish it. What are the rules of engagement? How are you going to reward it? What are in the confines, in the boundaries of what makes it a great one? What should it look like? How are we going to make culture carriers throughout?
So another question that came up then for me was, let's say that I'm in an organization that has, let's not say a bad culture, let's just say less than ideal. The culture is not perfect, and I don't have the ability to influence that. I'm maybe leading a team, but I'm not at that level where I can really give vision and push. So is it possible to establish a culture within a small team and then have that be a grassroots effort, or does it always have to be top down?
Well, it certainly helps to be top down, but you can create under the four walls, I'd call it. So you got your own four walls of where you might be leading, if it, again, is a Starbucks or wherever it may be. It can be anywhere. And be responsible for those four walls, the four people who you might be responsible for. You could be your subculture. And so you can live and prove. And I've been in it. I was at certain stores that were toxic, and then I was at certain stores that were amazing. What was the difference? The manager. So the manager really cared deeply, and even if things were not getting responded, or the sense of urgency from others wasn't there, or things were getting missed, that manager, or someone, if you remember, like John, my mentor, one of my first, and someone I'd always contribute to a lot of my successes, he took the time to create in our own four walls a special, unique way. And so, yeah, you can absolutely do it. It certainly is harder. And then, of course, you're going to seek some others out who you aspire. And those are the ways that you surround yourself with the right framework, the right peace of mind, really helpful for your state.
I think people will be drawn to your team if you have a good culture. They're going to look at the rest of this and go, boy, this is all bad. But over there, Eric's got it going on. I'm going to go. I want to be a part of that team and work with that group.
Wherever you go, restaurants are the easiest. You walk into a restaurant, any establishment, and within a minute, you can tell the artifacts of the mood of what's going on. Are people engaged or not? Does the hostess greet you with the right attitude, effort that she should? Is she really trying to create a special, unique customer experience? Does the waiter come over and greet you? When things go wrong, how do they handle it? And so, you can see the employees interacting. I share a story in the book about, I was so impressed with a restaurant, just the high fives behind the scene. The food was fine, man. It was really good, but I was more impressed with the other stuff. That's the stuff that's observable. Those are the things that you walk into an establishment and you feel it. It's there.
Yeah, I think I remember seeing an episode where Simon Sinek was talking about, he was chatting with somebody at a restaurant or a hotel, and what a wonderful experience he had. And then he talked more to that person and found that the person also worked somewhere else, and the opposite was true.
Yeah.
That over there he was a different person than he was at this place because of the culture.
Absolutely. Which again usually is from the manager. One of my nephews is starting an internship, and they're very excited and said, hey, what do I do if, do you think it's going to be a good experience? What do you think? And I go to my nephew, I said, it will be as good as your manager. I got to be honest. If they take it serious, even if some other things don't happen. Now, if you get leadership and the middle level and the bottom, if everything's in sync, it's going to be amazing. But it's look no further than the manager of.
Now, another one of the terms I thought was really funny was Rolling Stones. So
Yeah.
Can you tell me what that is? And then when you say that term, is there anybody just, leaps to your mind as somebody that represents that for you?
Absolutely. And it's, so this was one of the most rewarding things about leadership is the ability to develop individuals who have their own personalities, of course, but take on those little mini versions, maybe a little piece of who you were as the leader. And my last name being Stone, we were able to contribute a lot to the corporation throughout. And so they started to call the folks under our leadership the Rolling Stones. So those were the folks that would lead, and you would go to Germany or you could go to Nebraska, and throughout the country we had a little bit of those Rolling Stones permeating through the organization, to the point where one of my buddies was interviewing somebody and tried to take some credit for an initiative we started about 10 years ago. So it was really funny.
Another term that you have called the 4 Ds. I'm good at the first one and the third one, and I'm terrible at the other two. But do, delegate, defer, and delete. And I'm pretty good at doing and deferring. I'm not so good at delegating and deleting. So, how do you deal with those 4?
So that actually came up when we, as a team, felt they were a little overwhelmed with what was going on, and we were going into a peak season. There was a lot going on, and to be fair to them, we were probably right at that limit of pushing the envelope, to be honest. And so we needed to do something to try to free some things up. And so was it Maxwell? I think that was his name, John Maxwell, who I'm watching this thing online, and it talks about these 4 Ds for time management. And we thought it would be really helpful for our folks to learn that you can't do everything as you want to continue to be successful with it. And so you have to have the ability to potentially defer, so put it off. I take an email, or what do they call it? Delay delivery it for another week. I don't need it. I might be able to delegate it. So I might be able to take this task, give it to my team, and submit it clearly, communicate my goals and expectations, and fire that out. I might have to actually do it myself. So there were these things that we wanted to educate our team, that when they made decisions, we wanted them to be mindful of those 4 Ds, and we felt everyone was taking too much of their own, so they were trying to do it all, and you just can't. And so we tried to teach some lessons of those 4 Ds. And we ended up that's what was the schedule with precision. We ended up taking the time management to a scheduling tool to allow us to schedule people when we needed them, not when they always wanted to be scheduled, to really accomplish the business goal too. And it was extremely helpful because now they felt they were getting information that would push away some anxiety. And even if it only took 10% away, it was really, really important. It showed we were listening, we cared, we came up with an initiative, and we passed it on.
So a couple of key skills you mentioned. One was time management, which is where the 4Ds came into play. Earlier we talked about a key skill really being how to run meetings effectively. And another one that kind of came up when I was reading was, you said, get people engaged who don't always contribute. And I found this to be particularly challenging on video calls, especially if they have the camera off or if it's a hybrid call where there's some people in the room and some are calling in. What tends to happen is the people in the room dominate the conversation, and the people on the call at the very last second, oh yeah, Bob, you're on the call. You got anything to add? And of course, Bob doesn't, because all the good ideas are gone. So what are some skills there to try to make sure they do contribute?
Yeah, so I would on occasion give advance notice to you, Clint, and say, Clint, especially if you were doing it well and you don't always talk, because we needed you. You know, if it was a customer service piece and you had great customer service at your location and I needed you to be vocal and I didn't want to hear it from me, I would usually give an advance notice of, hey, I love you, Clint. I'm going to call you out. I want to give you a little advance notice. I'd love you to talk about. And so one was even before the meeting that would be really important, because I did want to try to give some heads up. And you really do have to be a bit of an artist when it comes to, Clint, that's a great thought. You know what I'd love to hear from is Eric. Eric, tell me about what, and so you'd have to have that delicate piece in those meetings to have them be called out. What we would do every Monday, we'd add all our area managers, regional manager, and myself. At 11 o'clock, we'd meet for about, up to 30 minutes. We were only going to pick one employee, one area manager who would oversee several locations. And they would be responsible to give an update of what they observed and what initiatives that they really supported and were really excited about, and the opportunity potentially. But they didn't know who was going to actually be the one to deliver it. And so we wanted all of them to be ready for a presentation. We just weren't going to always tell them. And so there's these little things that you could do to have everyone prepared. And I always used to love the fact that sometimes, and not all the time, but I would state, we can't leave this meeting until we've heard from everybody once, and we'd have a little checkbox and have fun with it. And so those are some small little things that you could do.
Okay, just don't be last. Well, like everybody else has already said, I think we should go left.
Yeah.
So another word that came up in the book, which I did not expect to see, because it's actually a book that I'm reading on it as well, which is, I always get the pronunciation wrong, but it's Ikagi.
Ikigai. Yeah.
Ikigai, there you go.
Yeah.
So what role does that play in culture?
I think it's really important, and it becomes too much sometimes of a buzzword, because it's really where you're taking, what you're really good at, the purpose you have. So it's really where you're kind of taking your passion, your purpose, what you're good at, and having everything trying to intersect in circles. And you want where these circles intersect to have everything. And it's this reason for being. In other words, why we're doing what we're doing. And so when you think about many industries, whether it's a restaurant chain or an enterprise rent-a-car, we rented cars. It just doesn't seem that exciting. When you think about it, my friends used to make fun of me all the time until they saw my career grow. But we didn't just rent cars. We were problem solvers. We got a chance to actually help people through a really difficult time, maybe a vacation, maybe they're on some corporate travel, and we got to deliver that. And that's where some of that ikigai comes in, this reason for being, this sense of purpose, where you're taking a bunch of different buckets that might intersect and showing your value to it.
Now, what is the difference between values and culture, and what does soup have to do with it?
Yeah. Well, values are just one of those pieces of culture. So most definitions, mine was values in action. And so that is one of the components. Just like getting in shape, there's not one exercise you're going to do. You're going to have to do a whole bunch of them. And I interviewed Claude Silver of VaynerMedia. So a lot of people have probably heard of Gary Vaynerchuk. It's Gary's second in command. And she said that, culture's like that minestrone soup. It's the bay leaf in the soup. We don't know what the heck it really does. It just makes the soup better, And so, culture's kind of that bit of a soup as she was describing. And values are one of the components.
Got it. One of the main ingredients, like the bay leaf. All right. Now, you tell a story about how the Great Recession happened while you were there. So what impact did that have on the business, and how did you react, and what did you learn from that?
Oh, God, a lot of learning lessons. I remember being at a yearly meeting, and in that industry that we were in, when you have manufacturers who might be going out of business, it was a scary, scary time. And again, the company's amazing. And it was the first time we had to actually have a reduction in force. And so we had to understand we're going to have to do things differently for a little bit. And for the outcome or that ikigai part of for the reason of being. I mean, we want to be here for the future, and so we might have to make some decisions that we're not used to making. And that started with a headcount, which was really challenging to do, and something that I really hated doing, but we had to do it. And we had to reimagine how businesses were, and so we had to look at every one of our leases. We had to look at every one of our rate structure. You have to do all of these things. And my biggest learning lesson is it allowed us to understand that you have to be adaptable in things, and you're going to have to make some difficult decisions, and you better communicate relentlessly. Because when that happens, people will come to their own conclusions as they do. The moment they see someone who is no longer with the company, if you don't communicate to all levels. And so we had to have conference calls upon meetings, upon in-person things. So they heard it from me as many levels from me and my regional manager and leadership. We didn't, and we knew we'd still get gossip because that's the one thing that ripples through every organization. That's the one thing that unfortunately is super good at communication is the gossip piece. And so it was so many learning lessons of communication, probably one of the bigger ones, difficult decisions, another, reimagining how we were going to do it. And shortly thereafter, we did things we never thought we would do before, to the good. So it ended up putting us in a really good place.
Well, as somebody who's run a business through the Great Recession and then through COVID, both of which were hard for us because our work is predominantly face-to-face. And so I can imagine the same in the rental car. I never thought about the parallels between what we do in the rental car business, but people aren't getting in cars during COVID more than likely and driving places because everybody's sheltering in place. And as you're having those conversations, the thought that comes to me is, I'm going to get the quote wrong, but there's something about people don't always remember what you say, but they remember how you made them feel. So even if it's bad news, if it's delivered in a way that comes from a good place and you're empathetic and this is not the best news, but clearly it's not something you're comfortable with, you don't want to do it, but I think people appreciate that.
Yeah, the absolute art, so important that, because you don't want to open yourself up to, why didn't you just tell me? Sometimes you're going to have to deliver that tough line, and sometimes there's just no way to sugarcoat it. It's like when you have to terminate an employee, Yeah. And the easiest way is it's like in baseball and Moneyball. If you saw Moneyball, they have a skit of get to the point. It's a tough thing. Be empathetic to the situation, but get right to the facts. It's not easy.
Well, speaking about terminating things, what is the John Wick School of Management?
Yeah. So we one year had this, every year we tried to have a unique challenge. And so I came up with one that was going to be, I thought was impossible. And if you're a John Wick fan, they made, John Wick became who John Wick was because they gave him a task that nobody thought he could do. And of course, John Wick was able to do it. I gave a task that I didn't think any of our team could do. And it was a balancing of two different fiscal years and rankings of, and we had to be, I think it was in the top 5, win 2 separate awards, get someone promoted out of the region. We had to do a lot within a short period of time in that. And I said, listen, if we do it, I'm taking everyone to wherever we want to go on me. It's not the company expense, on me. And fortunately or unfortunately, they did an amazing job and we hit everything we had to hit. We had an amazing experience. It was something that all the teammates, because we couldn't bring everybody, but we brought, I think it was about 17 people. We would have loved to have brought everybody, but sometimes you got to want to be that position. And they saw what that position gets, which was a few different trips. We ended up doing a Vegas and Florida trip. And it became a story of legend as it grows, and it was something that I thought would be impossible. And so we were leading by the John School Wick of Management, and they exceeded what I thought they could do.
It's a great analogy. I don't watch a lot of movies, but John Wick, I've seen those, and certainly Moneyball, you got to have seen that one.
That's right.
Now, as I'm reading the book, and look, I think we have a pretty good culture, but there were so many things I took away that I could do better. And I'm just curious, you grew up in kind of a large organization, and for somebody that's a small business owner, what Can you take these? Do they scale? I mean, because some of these, a mentor program, how big does it come down to be a mentor? So
Yeah.
what are some recommendations you would have for tailoring this for maybe some small businesses? I'm asking this selfishly.
Yeah, I mean, listen, most of the boards I've been on, some of the clients that I'll deal with, they're 12 people, 8 people. They're not all, 3,000 employees or anything like that. And so, yeah, if you have 5 employees, it might be hard to have an internal mentor program, but you might have connections that you could force an outside mentor program, people outside who might have some parallels. The factors of engagement I talked about, anybody can do them. Having a strong relationship is really important. All those factors are critical and that you could do. You certainly could put your values on a board and 3 behaviors that go under each one so everyone is in alignment with that. So there's a lot of things that you can still do. And in some cases, when I was at a lower level, entry level, it was easy to make change. So when I became an officer, it was turning a battleship. I could change a sales culture relatively fast with a team of 4, with a team of 8. It's just a little bit easier, frankly. And so there are some advantages and or disadvantages sometimes. But yeah, many of this, your 4 Ds, your difficult conversations, how to run a meeting. I mean, these are all skills, behaviors that are really important to do, whether you have 10,000 or 10.
Yep. No, that's great. So as I wrap up, I'm going to ask you 3 questions that I ask everybody that comes on the show. First, are there any leadership principles that speak to you personally and guide you on your day-to-day behaviors?
I don't know if it's a principle. It may be more of a quote that circumstances don't change your responsibility. And so whatever's going on in my personal life when I was leading, I don't mean it so literally that no one cares, but I still have I still have to lead. And the circumstances I might be going through or facing doesn't change my responsibility. And that was just that ownership mentality piece that maybe stuck with me a lot.
I think that's also a superpower for some people. And I think I have this, and that's compartmentalization. I'm able to take, and yeah, this part of my life could be something horrendous happening, but my mind is the client's paying me to be here. I'm here to facilitate. They might care, but I got 40 people that flew in to be here. They can't be dictated by the fact that my daughter's in the hospital or wherever that be. I got to be here and then after the meeting is over, then I can fly home and deal with that. So sometimes that comes across as callous, but to me, it's compartmentalization. And do you have the ability to do that or not?
Yeah, that is a superpower. And I commend you for that, because that's really, really hard to do, especially when it's something from home. But the ability to compartmentalize in general is such an important thing.
Yeah, absolutely. What's the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
Wow. I would say, well, I don't know if I can say, I got to give my dad a plug. I don't know if this is the best, but it comes to mind. There were 2 things. One, you can't win a negotiation if you're not willing to walk away. And that was really important, especially in difficult times at work. The other, he said one day, I couldn't have been on this earth to be a textile salesman. There's got to be more. And I really think that inspired me to probably write a book. Because when I certainly could have hung up my enterprise cleats and gone into the sunset, but I don't know. I thought there was more to do. So,
yeah, it reminds me of a personal story for me. It's my wife gave me tickets. I'm a big Neil Young fan, and she had given me tickets to see Neil Young, and she'd gotten the tickets, I guess, late, and they were literally the worst seats in the arena. You could not get any further away from the band. It was the last row, 100, as far away from the band as you can get. And she didn't want to go with me, so I had these 2 tickets. I'm walking into the Omni here in Atlanta, and I hit a scalper, and I said, I'll trade you 2 for 1. I'll give you these 2 tickets. Just give me 1 not quite as bad ticket. He goes, okay. And so I start to hand over my ticket, and he goes, plus $100. So I just turn around to walk away. He goes, hey man, we're negotiating. I'm saying, no, we're done. So I go in and I sit down, and this guy comes and sits beside me, and he looks around and he goes, man, these seats suck. I said, they really do. He goes, I'm with the band. Here's the front row seat.
Oh my God, that's great.
So I got to sit in the front row because I wouldn't negotiate with this guy because he was just being such a jerk.
Oh, I love Neil Young.
Oh yeah, for me, I love him too. And by the way, for anybody listening, these are not questions that I gave him in advance, so he's having to answer these off the cuff. So these are good answers. Yeah. What's the best book or article you've read recently, and what was the key takeaway?
Ooh, that's a. I don't know if I'd say article. I'd say podcast right now. I've been on this big podcast kick, if that's okay. And I love anything from, I think his name is Stephen Bartlett, Diary of a CEO, and Modern Wisdom with Chris Williamson. And just like any of their guests are just so inspiring. And so I would say anything in their podcast circle would be something. I'm trying to come up with the most recent book, and I don't know if I'd give it justice because I've been on a podcast rabbit hole. So I'll stick with the podcast stuff.
No, that's great. I'm going to add those to my listening list, so I appreciate that. Listen, this has really been great, Eric. I appreciate your time today. If people want to learn more about you and your work, contact you and hire you, how can they do that?
Easiest way, go right to LinkedIn. And that's popular. You can always go to clearpathventures.com and learn about a little bit more about my speaking opportunities that I do or coaching. So that's probably the easiest. Though I am on Instagram now, thanks to my daughter, as I give her a shout out. But LinkedIn's the best.
And on LinkedIn, what's the handle?
Oh, God.
Eric D.
Eric
Stone?
D. Stone's something Clear Path, maybe.
Okay.
Eric
All
D.
right.
Stone's the easy one.
Just make sure you're looking for it. And by the way, again, the book is Jumpstart Your Culture by Eric Stone, not Doug Stone, the country music singer, by Eric
That's
Stone.
right.
So, Eric, thank you so much for the conversation today.
Great. Thanks for all the homework and really enjoyed it.
Thanks for listening to The Conversation. To find out more about Clint, go to clintonmpaget.com and pick up Clint's book, How Teams Triumph, Managing by Commitment, at Amazon. The Conversation with Clinton M. Paget is a production of Forbes Books.